Joe Cornish is one of the UK's most respected landscape photographers. He originally studied fine art at university, then moved to Washington DC in 1980, where he assisted a commercial photographer for 2 years. Always drawn to the countryside, in 1986 he was commissioned to produce a book about the founders of the National Trust. He spent the following decade shooting travel and landscape commissions, after which he decided to commit to large format photography, which marked a new phase in his landscape work. He hopes to inspire a love of nature and an awareness of the importance of conservation in others, and also sees the natural world as a fundamental part of our identity as humans. I met up with him to discuss 3 of his landscape images. Hi Joe.
Hi Ailsa.
It's always good to see you and get the opportunity to talk about some of your pictures, and we've got 3 here today that I think have quite different stories behind each one. This first one, I believe, was shot in Toran and was shot originally on 5:4 transparency, but I understand you've revisited it recently to give it something of a reinterpretation.
Yes, I think that'd be fair to say, although it's not a radical one. The original, as you say, was shot on tranny film on Fuji Provia, and as you can see, it's fairly extreme into the light. A big challenging subject actually for transparency film because of the high contrast of the material, and it's challenging in other ways on the day because it's a 5-mile hike in, carrying 20 kilos or so, and it's in the middle of the summer. So when I say the middle of the summer, I mean around June the 21st.
And with transparency film, obviously you're restricted by the range.
Dynamic range.
The dynamic range of the film itself, and then you've got the dynamic range of the paper as well when you're making the print. So tell us a bit about that.
Sure, that's a good point, because the dynamic range of the light in a situation like this, if we look at the bright highlights here, which in classical terms might well be EV sort of 18, and the deep shadows in the foreground, they'd probably be about EV 6 or 7.
Yeah.
So at least a range of 11, 12, 13 stops of light, which for a transparency film, which might have a maximum apparent range of about 6 stops, is a big technical challenge. Yeah. A modern digital sensor could possibly just about bridge that gap, but the quality of the signal would be very, very poor. I used a filter for the sky, 3-stop hard, which helps to cut the range in that sense.
Would that have come down to roughly this sort of point or higher?
No, you're absolutely right. The transition zone, if you think about it, it's always difficult to be sure exactly, but you look at the tops of the mountains down to about there. And it's a forgiving scene because there's enough haze for the light to diffuse and scatter.
Yeah, and you talked about the 5-mile hike to get to this point. How important is that aspect of photography to you? You talk about sort of engaging with the landscape in that way. That's all part of the process for you, isn't it? Well,
without sounding too hippyish, I think you do feel the land through your feet as well as through your eyes, and and through your body. And it's a very kind of holistic experience. So I mean, I can get out of a car and a lay-by and still enjoy my photography, but I get more out of it when I kind of put in the physical effort to do it. There's a balance to be struck. If you overdo it, you're going to be absolutely exhausted. Yeah. But yes, I mean, an experience like this, it's one of the things that makes life worthwhile for me.
And so, a hike like that, is that with this end point in mind? Is this something you see along the way? Are you distracted along the way by other possibilities?
So yes, this is a good example of one where I actually came to photograph something else, the triple buttress, which was 180 degrees in the opposite direction to this angle that you see here. And indeed I did make some pictures of it, but for me this is a composition and the moment, totally unexpected, that was the most successful and for me means the most.
So with this next picture, it's almost the iconic Yosemite scene. So what kind of pressure is there when you stand in front of a scene like this to make it your own?
Well, that's a good question. It's because it's literally been photographed for 150 years. Tunnel view. There's a car park about 100 feet below where I'm standing. And you're conscious of the fact that lots of people photograph it, not just every year, but every day. Yeah. There's thousands of pictures made from here. I think that in retrospect, you don't value what you've done unless you feel there is something that is your own personal take on the scene. I remember standing at Tunnel View and looking over this magnificent prospect of Yosemite Valley, feeling a bit disappointed.
Oh, really?
And it was purely because Ansel Adams's Clearing Winter Storm is like this shadow in my brain that I can't sort of turn off, certainly if I'm in Yosemite. So this is a clear homage to Ansel Adams, and in many ways that's why I love this picture, because it does reference Clearing Winter Storm, although this is a gathering storm rather than a clearing one, and it's a much more brooding picture, I would suggest, than Ansel's. I'm very happy with the fact that I've got you could just get this glimpse of Half Dome in the far distance, which, by the way, is not present in Clearing Winter Storm.
Oh, isn't it?
So, so I feel I've got one level further back than Ansel managed in his. But no, I mean it's mostly about the ebb and flow of cloud, of valley cloud, and the mood and the emotion of for me of the moment, the very, very minimal colour, and that it's a unique moment in time.
And in terms of controlling that light, did you have to use the grad for this image?
Yes, yes, inevitably, and 3 stops of medium grad from memory was the right one.
And with something like this, where you say the light was building, the storm was gathering, presumably you would have taken a number of shots, and how then do you go about choosing which one is the shot that you're going to then make into a print?
I was surprised to find that there was some where I actually felt that the valley cloud might have been a bit more interesting, but it's a balance of all the elements, and the fact that here there was only about 3 of my 15-20 exposures that showed half tone, and to me that was a very important detail because it echoes the cathedral peaks here. That combination of elements, it was at its best in this frame, so that's why I chose it. If it had been shot on film, I probably, because of the sheer cost of shooting, you would have had fewer opportunities to just try it, and it's one of the beauties of shooting digitally. Yeah.
Do you find that almost frees you up to an extent?
I think so, and at the same time, it can be a trap because you can become dependent on it. So it's really important to try to preserve that sense of that every moment matters.
So with this last image, I think it's got quite an interesting story, because we tend to think of landscape photography as something quite slow and contemplative, and you've got plenty of time to wait for the image to come together, but I gather that this was a slightly different story.
Well, it would be nice to say that it's a great stress reliever doing landscape photography, but sometimes it can really ramp up the stress levels, and I think this is a good example of that, because I had come to this very quiet beach in the Outer Hebrides one evening with a hope of making a sort of colourful sunset picture. It's, as you can see, not a dramatic place in terms of the actual landscape, low-lying dunes in the distance and fairly flat beach, beautifully clean and nobody around. And about 45 minutes later, nothing much was happening, and the sun was going into the cloud, and the colour that had been there was kind of dying off, and I was pretty despondent and just started packing down, and I just spotted this cloud starting to sort of build, moving from west to east. And then this extraordinary echoing shape started to build. And at that point, bear in mind that the large format camera, once you put the dark slide in, you can't see the composition. You've visualized it upside down on the ground glass screen. You have to close the lens, cock the shutter. If you're going to make your exposure, obviously the dark slide has to go in. You have to pull the dark slide. And each time I was thinking, I need to recompose, take the dark slide out, open the shutter, and it was all moving pretty quickly. So I actually managed to make 5 exposures like that. This is the final one, the 5th exposure, and I've had to move the camera now around to the right as well, and you can see that it extends around. And I wasn't absolutely convinced that I hadn't clipped a bit of the cloud until I saw the film back from the lab. Right. It's not like shooting digitally when you know when you've got it. If I'd shot this picture with with a DSLR and it was just as good, I'd be just as happy with it. But you can't help getting away from the fact that when you've made it that way, it sort of embeds itself into your brain slightly differently in your memory. I mean, probably more importantly though, is I think that I look at all the alignments and so on in it between the textures and edges of the cloud and the beach and the pool and the channel and so on. And it feels like a kind of, I mean, sometimes you get lucky. And there's that old Gary Player saying, isn't there? The more I practice, the luckier I get. And I think that I've been very lucky as a working photographer all my life, making pictures, not every day, but day in, day out on assignment for years and years and years. So you are equipped to cope with challenging times when they arrive, and that's how it should be. So even though I was using equipment that was completely unsuited for this type of photography, in retrospect, I was lucky enough to get it. Yeah.